Every household has keys, and it seems like in every household there's at least one person who can't seem to keep track of their keys. Well, I've always had a key holder in my home. You know, this is one of those projects, seems like it's one of the very first things any woodworker makes. And some of them just take a board and put some hooks on it. Some of them get a little fancier, shaping it like a key or maybe a fish or a mountain scene or something like that. You know, it really doesn't matter. It's what your personal preference is. We've taken that idea and we've gone maybe a step further with it. We've attached the key holder to a box, and you can hang this whole thing on the wall. It gives you some place to put things like phones or the mail when it comes in, or even things that you need to take when you go out again so that you don't forget them. You know, I'm pretty good at that. This is a useful project and it's a good beginner project. So let's get started and let's make ourselves a key holder. I've cut up my material, and before I start sanding, I just want to mention something. As I was cutting, I was very cognizant of where the knot holes are. At my local lumberyard, I don't have any sort of premium pine available, or any hardwood for that matter. All I've got is what would be normally considered common pine or construction grade. And that's what I've got here. This is #1 pine. #1 pine is going to have some knot holes in it, normally small ones. But even so, how many knot holes do we want in our finished piece, and how big can those be? If you look at this piece right here, it has a couple of knot holes in it, and I decided that I didn't want to bother using them. Of the pieces I'm using, most of the knot holes are little tiny ones, okay? The one piece that has a knot hole of any real size happens to be the piece that's going to be the bottom, so it's not going to be as visible, and I'll mount it on the bottom so that the knot hole is towards the back where it's even less visible. So that's something we can do to get better mileage out of the lumber that's available to us. You don't necessarily have to buy premium wood. You can buy lesser grades of wood. Make sure that when you cut it up, you pick out the parts of the wood to use so that the pieces that are going to be the most visible, for example, the top or the front, are going to have less knot holes showing. We want to take care as we're sanding this pieces for this project because of where it's going to go. Now, we've had some projects that we've done, and I've said sanding wasn't all that critical because they were somewhat rustic projects, or because they were going to go in the shop, like the clamp rack we made, which I have hanging over here on the wall. If something's going in my shop or something's going to be used outdoors, I'm not so concerned about it, about how well I sand it. But this is going to be hanging on the wall inside my home. Therefore, I want to sand it well, and I want to go through the various grades of sandpaper to make sure I get a nice finish on it. The instructions call for staining these pieces before putting them together, which is a really good idea on a small project like this because it'd be really hard to stain the inside otherwise. Now, you always want to shake stain before you use it, and I believe in wearing rubber gloves when I'm staining because I always seem to manage to get the stain on my fingers. Okay, so now there's a couple different schools of thought about staining. One is that you put the stain on and you just let it dry, and doing so will give you a darker finish. Problem is that it'll take a couple days. If you're using an oil-based stain, it'll take a couple days before you can actually work with the parts. So what I generally do is I'll put the stain on and then I'll wipe it off. I get the stain comes out the color it's supposed to that way, and I don't end up with a big mess. But as you can see, I've already managed to get a mess on my hands. The grain of the wood affects the stain greatly. So the more open, the more porous the grain is, the more stain is going to soak in. What that means is that on your wood, in this case pine, some of the grain, parts of the grain are more porous than others. The other thing is that the end grain is going to soak up more stain than the long grain will. So that's part of what gives it its beauty, that variety in coloration. They've told us to go ahead and stain these pieces before putting them together, which is a great idea, as it'd be really hard to stain on the inside. It does cause us one problem though. PVA wood glue, our typical wood glue that we use, works by soaking into the surface of the wood. So once we've stained this, we actually have to give it several days to dry so that the pores are open again and the glue can soak into the wood. The other thing I've done is I've taken a good look at all my pieces and I've decided which side is going to be the outer side or the front side. And I've gone ahead and marked them with tape so I know that. And I've gone ahead and countersunk and drilled my pilot holes for the pieces going in. That's something they do tell us to do in the instructions. We're now ready to start putting it together. And I'm going to start with the back. The back gets put on with screws and glue, both, okay? So we'll go ahead and put some glue on here. concerns is that if I screw the bottom piece in without screwing the top piece in, there's a really good chance that I'm going to end up with the sides here angled in. I'm eliminating that possibility by going ahead and putting both pieces together. So I got a little bit of glue squeeze out there, so we'll go ahead and wipe that off. We want to be very careful screwing these in, because if we go too far, we're going to split the wood. The reason we use screws on the back is because they won't be visible. But on the front, we can't get away with that. So on the front, we're going to go ahead and use nails to put it together. Now I'm leaving a little bit of a gap, visible gap down here at the bottom, so we can see things that are in it and help us remove anything that may fall down. Now we could just run our 3 nails in straight, but to get a better grip on it, I'm going to actually angle the nails, the outer 2 nails, toward the center. That increases the amount of holding power that they've got, much less likely to come out. The only thing we've got left is to put the hooks on here. I've gone ahead and laid a piece of painter's tape on here so I can do my layout without actually marking on the wood. I could mark on the wood, but that would be permanent, to be visible. So I've got my spots where I'm going to put the hooks. I'll go ahead and drill a small pilot hole. Thread the hooks in. A little trick you can do is take one of your hooks and put it into your drill on slow speed, and then hook that into the other hooks and use it to drive them in. Saves a lot of time. So here's our finished key holder. You might notice a couple little white spots here. I'm going to have to touch up the finish a little bit, and some of that's just plain sawdust off my bench, but all we need is some keys and put a few things inside. It's ready to use. So why don't you go make your own?